Gute Woche. Der Rebbe soll gesund sein, begann der Farbrengen, how Shabbos is different from the entire week, and that on Shabbos there is an aliyas ha'olamos, which means that all the worlds are spiritually uplifted on Shabbos. And the Rebbe explained how we find in Olam, Shana, Nefesh. In other words, we find in many inyanim, we find, as we will explain in a minute, we find it in place, and we find it in soul and person, and we find it in time. That it comes certain times or certain inyanim that are extremely uplifted and spiritually. For example, Eretz Yisrael. On one hand, we know that Meloi Chalaretz Kavayde, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is all over the world, regardless wherever we'll be talking in the world. On the other hand, we are told that Eretz Yisrael is something very special. It's an Eretz Asher Einei Hashem Elokecha Ba Mereishis Hashana V'ad Achashana. It's a land where HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of gives special attention to from beginning to the end of the year. In another way, we have it in people. Everyone was created by the Rebbeinu Shalom. At this, on one hand. On the other hand, Yidden are special. To the extent that there's an expression in the Zohar, Gufa Dilhoin Kadisha, the Guf, the body of the Yid, though a Goy also has a body. So we are told that the body of the Yid is Kodesh. There's a sanctity, there's a Kedusha in the Guf of a Yid. Then the Zohar goes ahead and continues, Nishmasa Dilhoin Kadisha. The neshama, the soul of a Yid, is also heilig. Now here the Rebbe wanted to explain that in every inyan which we have in the world, there are many, many details to the inyan, being that it all originated and stems from the Rebbeinu Shalom, and the Rebbeinu Shalom is Ein Soif. Therefore, inyanim that He created are also endless, without any limit, unlimited. In this inyan that we're talking about the body of the Yid, which is Kodesh. However, it is self-understood that within the body of the Yid there are many, many levels. The highest level will be his brain, the Mayach. The lowest level would be the Okev, would be the toe. If we're talking in the spiritual sense, in the Nishmasa Dilahain, in the Neshama of the Yid, there are also levels. The highest level in Neshama would be referred to as the level of Yechida. This is the highest madrega of the Neshama. And then just like in a Guf, there is an Okev, there is a soul in the S-O-L-E. In a Guf, there's the same thing in the Neshama as well. I mean, no. That's what I mean. The Okev, that's why I said S-O-L-E, not the soul. And the same in every inyan which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created. There are many, many, countless of levels in the inyanim which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created. And in people, we just mentioned there is the levels of Yidden compared to Goyim, and amongst Yidden Gufa there's also an inyan of Koyanim. A Koyan is yet Chasheva, and Koyanim G'daylim. While talking about this inyan, the Rebbe quoted a Chazal, which the Chazal says, based on the pasuk, "Va'atem tiyu li mamleches koyanim," that every Yid is considered like a kohen. The Rebbe quoted a Chazal that not only is every Yid considered a kohen, every Yid is considered like a kohen gadol. Getting back to our inyan, and the same we find it as mentioned in Olam, we find it in days. It's the inyan of Shabbos. Shabbos is holier than all the days of the week. And in Shabbos itself, there are also various levels of Shabbos. There's the level of Shabbos of Friday night. There's the level of Shabbos by day. Until we know how it's explained in Sfarim that the highest madrega of Shabbos is Shabbos in the afternoon. That is the time, as the Zohar refers to it, a time of Raiva de Raivin. That's how it's referred to in Zohar. Rava means a wish. Yehi Rotzoin, which we say at Tefillah, Yehi Rotzoin. In Aramaic, Rotzoin is translated Rava, a will, a wish. In other words, this is the most suitable time for fulfillment of wishes. I didn't mention it here, but he mentioned it on other occasions. That is why, by Minach of Shabbos, before we take out the Sefer Torah, we add on a pasuk before Berich Shmei. We say, "Vanis filosi lacha Hashem Elokim b'rovachas eis rotzim." It is a suitable time. In other words, a time of Mincha. Shabbos Mincha is a very, very suitable time, a very special time. Vanis filosi lacha Hashem eis rotzim. It's an eis rotzim. It's a suitable time, a special time. Shabbos Niftanu. So we see how there are many inyanim which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created, and all of these inyanim, this whole sikha seems like is like a lengthy introduction about the Maila of Shabbos in general. And all of these inyanim which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created all have many, many details within themselves. Getting back to Shabbos, Rebbe brings the famous Gemara where a Gentile, a goy, was once in a conversation with a Tana, and he asked him to prove to him that we have to observe Shabbos. So his answer was Sambatyon Yechiach, which means the Sambatyon, which is an area which Kodesh Baruch has created, which throws rocks the entire week, a river, and it comes Shabbos, it rests. So Rabbi says, being that this individual asked for an interpretation about Shabbos, and the response which was given to him was about the Sambatyon, so from here we derive that he was not aware of that. After he was answered and told that the Sambatyon is an evidence on Shabbos, and therefore we should take our example from that and observe Shabbos, this convinced him the importance of observing Shabbos. So here actually we have a combination of the inyan of Bria, how the world was created, the creation of the world, and together with the Yom HaShabbos, how these things are tied together. In other words, from Bria, from the world which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created, from there we have a strength, and then we derive strength from there that we are to observe and adhere to Shabbos. And Shabbos should be a Yom HaMnucha, a day of rest. Amongst people also, there is a Talmid Chacham. Regarding the Talmid Chacham, the Gemara tells us that a Talmid Chacham is always referred to as Shabbos. Even the entire week is referred to as Shabbos. Then we have Balei Yesek, people who are involved in the world of business. And in the people who are involved in the world of business, there are also various levels. And the Rebbe explained at length. He says there are those who are taka businessmen. First of all, there are those who sit and learn and dwell into the greatness of godliness, and they are compensated for that, and they have no shaykhs to the world whatsoever. Then we have those who are in the world of business. However, they can be selling tashmish kedusha. In other words, they could be selling tefillin and other holy things, which on one end they are involved in the union of business, an union of mischa, but we cannot say that they are fully involved in worldly inyanim. Then we have, like we find the description regarding Zvulun, that Zvulun used to travel on waters, Zvulun l'chayf yamim yishkoin, and he used to travel and make kamatya and do business. Here we are talking about somebody who's already fully involved in the world of business. And when it comes Shabbos, all of these Yidden have their uplifting, have a spiritual aliyah. This is the whole lineage what Chassidus stresses at length regarding Vayechulu Hashamayim V'Oretz V'Chol Tzavom, that it comes Shabbos, the entire week and everything that happened in the week has its uplifting, goes up higher and higher. How great the Inyanim were during the week, come Shabbos they go yet greater, yet higher. Memela, now that we're talking on this Shabbos, there's the Vayechulu of the Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni was yesterday. So now on Shabbos, Pesach Sheni has its aliyah, its spiritual uplifting. Though Shabbos has an effect on the entire week that passed, however, it is definitely understood that Shabbos has a yet closer shaykhs to the immediate days that are close to Shabbos. Regarding Thursday, it's brought in Svarim that Thursday has a special shaykhs to Shabbos. Regarding Friday, it's very obvious. There's the famous Chazal, Misha Tarach be'erev Shabbos, Yechal b'Shabbos, the one who has prepared on Erev Shabbos, he has what to eat on Shabbos. What do we mean Erev Shabbos? Though many times we explain Erev Shabbos that it not necessarily limits us to Friday. But on the other hand, when we're referring to Erev Shabbos, it means Friday. So when we're talking here regarding our Inyan, Pesach Sheni was on Friday. What is the lesson, the moral of Pesach Sheni? The moral of Pesach Sheni is the very famous one which the Frierdiker Rebbe has related to us. Asinishta came farfal, meaning it is never too late. Though we're talking of what is Pesach Sheni? Pesach Sheni means that there were those Yidden who it was impossible for them to be makriv the Korban Pesach. Why? Because they were bederech rechoika, they were far away from the Beis Hamikdash, or they were tamei, and that is why they couldn't be makriv the Korban Pesach. So they came to Moshe Rabbeinu and complained. And their argument was, Lama Nigora, why should we be excluded? Why should we be missing this inyan of Korban Pesach? And then Moshe Rabbeinu went to the Rabbeinu Shalom and found the solution with a Pesach Sheni. So here we see that Pesach Sheni comes to show us that it is never too late, though one was far away, and he was, as we will get to in a minute in the Farbrengen. The same is spiritual sense as well. One who was far away spiritually. He was in a far off way spiritually. He was b'derech rechoika. Comes Pesach Sheni, the lesson from Pesach Sheni comes to tell us that it is never too late to nishok in farfal. To the extent, just like we see over there, that the argument of Lama Nigora, when the Yidden were complaining, those who were not able to be makriv the Pesach Rishon, were complaining Lama Nigora, HaKadosh Baruch Hu found a solution for them. The same, it is through every mitzvah which a Yid fulfills. Every mitzvah does tremendous accomplishments. The Rebbe brought an example. We know we sail Sfira every night. So after sailing Sfira, we say the Rabbeinu Shalom. And in the Rabbeinu Shalom from Sfira Sa'ima, we express ourselves. Val Yidei Zeh, through doing this counting of the Sfira, Yushpa Shefarav B'chol Oilamis. May the abundant bounty thereby be bestowed upon all the worlds. So, the Rebbe says, Shefa, in general, means an abundance of brachas. So here we say not only an abundance of brachas, but Shefarav, a large quantity of brachas. And where will all this come down? Not just limited to the individual who has fulfilled the mitzvah. It will be b'chol ha'olamis upon all the worlds. And this shows us the greatness of one mitzvah. So we have the same idea. That is why the Yidden felt bad when they were not able to fulfill the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. And the same, in general, every mitzvah is so meaningful that it brings shefarav b'chol ha'olamis. The Rebbe explained regarding Pesach Sheni, being that at the title of the day it's called Sheni, second, meaning it comes after a Rishon. So first there's a Rishon. After the Rishon comes the Sheni. So this shows us that the Sheni comes after the Rishon. When one inyan comes after another, this indicates that this inyan is yet higher in spiritual level as well. Where do we find it? By Pesach Sheni we find different halachas than by Pesach Rishon. Pesach Rishon we are prohibited to eat the Pesach while we possess chametz. However, Pesach Sheni, the halacha is that oichloi ve'imei chametz. He's allowed to eat the Korban Pesach, which is brought on Pesach Sheni, and at the same time, he's allowed to possess chametz in his house. What does this show us? Explain the Chassidus what the whole meaning of chametz is. Chametz is a reflection of the evil. Matzah is positive. Tzaddik Kedusha. This is the same idea of Korban Pesach. So on Pesach Rishon, we are not yet in a madrege where we can eat the Korban Pesach and at the same time possess chametz. Comes Pesach Sheni, we are already at a higher madrege. We were uplifted to a level where we are eating the Korban Pesach, fulfilling the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, and at the same time to possess chametz is no contradiction to Pesach. In other words, we are mivara de birurim, in other words, the Korban Pesach, which is brought on Pesach Sheni, is a kind of more powerful than the one of Pesach Rishon. The Yid has then an opportunity to hold the chametz, possess chametz in his boundaries, in his house, in his room where he's eating the Korban Pesach, and spiritually he's mevaral the birurim also of the chametz which he's possessing at that time. Here the Rebbe says, one will say to himself, he's already in a position that he cannot think, where does he have to correct himself in any way? The lesson of Pesach Sheni is, as his nishtokim found that it is never too late. However, he's in a perfect level. He has nothing to catch up to. He's already done everything, and he's on a chazakeh, that everything is perfect by him. So what does Pesach Sheni mean to such an individual? Explaining that if we are aware of a Yid, that we know that Yid is in the position that he was not able to be makriv of the Pesach Rishon. Why? Because he was b'derech echoika. He's in the distance. He's far away. He's far away from what? Far away from the Beis Hamikdash. How could we say a Yid is far away from the Beis Hamikdash? The Rebbeinu Shalom is all over. So if the Rebbeinu Shalom is all over, wherever he is, he's with the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Rebbe says, so it must be that we're talking about an individual who's a tinuk shenishba, who never had any opportunity to familiarize himself with Yiddishkeit, or we're talking about one who was ponu elai oiref, meaning he turned away his head from the Rebbeinu Shalom. He turns around from the Rebbeinu Shalom. So if he turns around from the Rebbeinu Shalom, he's far away from him. He's considered tamei, and it's considered in b'derech echoika, far away, in a far away route away from the Rebbeinu Shalom. So it is our obligation, if we only know of such Yid, to reach out to this Yid, to go and knock on his door and tell him we have a message for him. But if we will knock on his door and he will see who is there, and he may not even want to let us into his door. Through the door, we should relate the message to him. Then we have to knock on his window and see to it that we bring him this message and explain to him and bring him across that there's an inyan of Pesach Sheni, and Pesach Sheni simply means asin nishta kein verfallen. It is never too late. And how far a Yid may have been, he can always return, and he's always welcome to return, and he's asked to return. And here the Rebbe said, on the other hand, when we reach out to this Yid, here we know the Gemara tells us that if one tells to another, Toil kisim mibein shinecha, get the splinter out between your teeth. And the other one responds, Toil koira mibein einecha. In other words, what are you telling me? That I have a small thing, I have a splinter between my teeth? There's a beam right in front of your eyes which is blocking your vision. In other words, you have to be more corrected than I do. The Rebbe says, even at times, when we knock on a door, when we try to come to a Yid who's been nefesh, who's been b'derech echoika and has been a tamei lenefesh, and he's responding to us in such a way that he's telling us, what do you want from me? You have inyanim which you also have to rectify. You have inyanim which you also have to be improved in. So enochanam, and maybe, in other words, this whole thing, this is how the Hashgacha Pratis has led. We have came out to this person and we're trying to bring him back, as bring him the message as his nishtoki farfaun, and at the same time he's bringing a message to us. He's finding things in us which we have to correct and which we have to rectify, and we have to respond to that and correct them as well. It is also the 15th day of Iyar today. And the inyan of a 15th day in the month is Kaim Mesiyah Rabash Lemusa. That is when the moon is in its completeness. Rabbi says this inyan of Kaim Mesiyah Rabash Lemusa is explained in Zoya and explained in Medrash. But on the other hand, every child that goes into the street sees that the moon is complete when it is the 15th of the month. And the lesson which we have to derive from this is that all the inyanim which we have just discussed, the entire Hira of Pesach Sheni has to be fulfilled in such a way of a shleimus, in a way of completeness, not to do it partially and the other half leave hanging and so forth, but everything has to be done to the fullest extent. Especially that we know that Yisrael Meinin Levana. This is how the Yiddish calendar is set up. It's set up according to the Levana, according to the moon. And just like before, we were talking about a Bal Asik, about a businessman. So when a businessman has to write a deal and has to put his transaction into writing, it has to have a date, and the date is one which is according to the calendar. So we see that this is a thing which involves everybody. So we have to keep this lesson in mind as well, that Yisrael Meinin Levana, and today it is Kaim Mesiyah Rabash Lemusa. The Levana is in its completeness. Memela, all of the inyanim have to be done in this sense. The Rebbe also mentioned that regarding today's day, 15 days in the month of Iyar, we find in Chumash what happened today, that when the Yidden left Mitzrayim, the food that they had taken along with them lasted them until the 15th day in Iyar. And when it came the 15th day in Iyar, that is when the Yidden asked for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give them food, to give them their needs. Mela, this is an appropriate day also that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless Yidden with all their needs, and we should have all of the Gashmis to Kinyanim that a Yid needs. Just like Shabbos, Rabbi continues, has a shaykhus to the week that passed. And Mela, we had Pesach Sheni this week, as we just discussed the hero of Pesach Sheni, the inyan of a sinishtoki and farfal. The same way, Shabbos has a shaykhus to the week that is coming. As the famous expression in the Zohar, that Shabbos min name is Borchin Kula Yomen, that Shabbos gives bracha to the entire week. And if we want to look for a special day in this week, it's very obvious that the day in this week is Lag B'Omer. Lag B'Omer is a special and very meaningful day. And Lag B'Omer receives bracha from today, from Shabbos. Regarding Lag B'Omer, which is the day of Rab Shimon ben Yochai, and Rab Shimon ben Yochai expressed himself that he wants this day to be a Yom Simcha, a day of joy and happiness for each and every Yid. Just like the Rebbe says, we know that Ein Simcha Ela Bebasa, Ve'ein Simcha Ela Beyayin, that physical Simcha can be. Rabbi Yontef, we find this halacha, that physical Simcha can come about to a person when he drinks wine and when he eats meat. The same comes Lag B'Omer. Lag B'Omer, Rab Shimon ben Yochai wants we should be happy. Because of him, it is his day. The Alter Rebbe tells us in the Geras HaKodesh, the Rebbe continues, what Alter Rebbe writes about a tzaddik's passing from this world, that there is Drachav, the Chaysav, Asher Heranu. There are the teachings which the tzaddik has inherited to us. And when we follow the teachings of the tzaddik, we become closely associated with him. This is pertaining Drachav, the Heroisav. In other words, there are many ways and paths of the tzaddik which he had, and by attaching ourselves to these paths, we become attached to the tzaddik. And as the Alter Rebbe uses the expression in the Geras HaKodesh, Drachav, the Heroisav, Asher Heiranu, Netzach Sela Voed, which is an expression of eternity. And there's a famous Chazal, Kol Mokim, any place where the lashon of Netzach is used, it means eternal. So Mamela, how do we get an eternal shaykhus to the tzaddik? By associating ourselves with his paths and ways which were his way of life. Regarding Rab Shimon ben Yochai, the Rebbe says, we don't have to look for his paths and for his ways. We have an inyan, paths and ways is a plural expression. There's an inyan which had a shaykhus to Rab Shimon ben Yochai, a singular inyan, which this reflects him totally. Regarding Rab Shimon ben Yochai, we find Toirasa Yom Nosai. What was his occupation? His occupation was Torah. In other words, Rabbi explains, there are many people that could be learning Torah daily. For example, one who's a merchant, he's learning Torah daily in the sense of Perek Echad Shachis or Perek Echad Arvis. He learns, has a shir in the morning and has a shir in the evening. He's fulfilling the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. And he's fulfilling it fully in his type of a position. And we know how serious the inyan of learning Torah is. This we know from the Alter Rebbe from the first parak of Tanya. Here we are talking about Rab Shimon ben Yochai in a much higher level. We are told, Torah Sayom Nosai. He had no other occupation but other than Torah. He was solely involved in the learning of Torah. Memela, when we're looking for a special inyan in Rashbi, and we want to find what's so special about Rashbi. So first of all, there's a remarkable Gemara about Rab Shimon ben Yochai, that Rabbi Akiva, who was his Rebbe, expressed himself regarding Rashbi. Dayoch, shani uboiracha, makirin eskechacha. It's sufficient, Rabbi Akiva says, that Rabbi Akiva himself, who was Rab Shimon ben Yochai's Rebbe, and his creator, meaning the Rebbeinu Shalom, are the ones who realize the strength of Rashbi. In other words, the Rebbe says we're talking about a generation of Tanoim. The other Tanoim, other than Rabbi Akiva and Rab Shimon ben Yochai, lived in that generation. Still, Chazal tell us that who was the one? There was only one individual who was able to recognize the greatness of Rashbi. And who was that? Rabbi Akiva. And that's what he told him. It is only him and the Rebbeinu Shalom that realized his greatness. And what is the greatness that we find? What do we find in Chazal related to us about Reb Shimon ben Yochai, that Reb Shimon ben Yochai was Torah Yom Noseh. His entire sole occupation was Torah. When we are looking for a special inyan in the day of Lag Baimer, which Lag Baimer receives bracha from this Shabbos, it is the inyan of Torah. It is also Parshas Behar today, and this is something which was read in Shul publicly, and everybody knows that today we read the Parsha of Behar. So in this inyan of Parshas Behar, the Rebbe spoke about it in the Maimah, and he spoke about it as well later in the Sicha. The Sedra begins, Vaydaber Hashem, Kadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Moshe Behar Sinai, and right away begins relating Daber el Bnei Yisrael, they're relating the inyan of Shemitah. Daber el Bnei Yisrael, talk to the Yidden, V'amart aleim, you shall tell them. What should you tell them? Ki savayu al haaretz asher ani nosen lachem, when you will come into the land which I will give you, v'shavsa haaretz Shabbos lashem, and the land will rest a sabbatical year. So Rebbe asked a very obvious question. What was first? Was the year of rest first, or were the 6 years of work first? Obviously, this is how the halach is. When the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael, first they had 6 years of work. After the 6 years of work comes Shemitah. The pasuk does not say that. Pasuk says, "Ki savayu al haaretz asher ani nosen lachem." What shall you do? V'shavsa haaretz Shabbos lashem. Shall be a year of rest. Then the pasuk goes on, "Sheish shanim tizra sadecha." Then the pasuk gets back. For 6 years you should go and do all your field work. V'sheish shanim tizra kamecha, and all the work in your vineyards. V'asaftas tvuasa, and you will gather all your tvuah. Then the pasuk comes back to Vashana Hashviyis, Shabbos and Yelot. Rabbi explained that in Torah there's an inyan of notes tchilasam b'soifan. In other words, we are told right away what is the ultimate goal of this entire inyan. True, physically, the Yidden were not able to fulfill Shemitah unless they had 6 years of work prior to that. This is how the halacha is. However, what was the ultimate goal of the 6 years of work in the field, so that they should come to the V'shavsa haaretz Shabbos lashem? So the pasuk spells us out first the soif before the tchilah, because it is notes tchilasan b'soifan, the notes soifan b'tchilasan. In other words, we are told right away what is the ultimate goal of this entire inyan, so that we should come to a madrege of V'shavsa haaretz Shabbos lashem. As it's customary in the Farbrengen, Rebbe learns a Rashi, raises questions in a Rashi, and as it's customary recently that these are questions which the Rebbe suggests and asks that they be printed. Anyone that has questions in a Rashi, the Sedra should submit them to the various periodicals and journals which are being printed by the Bachim and the various yeshivas. And that is where the Rebbe takes the questions of the Rashi. At the end of the Sedra, we have a pasuk Nun Hey. Ki li b'nei Yisrael avodim. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, Yidden are my slaves. Avadayhem, they are mine. My slaves, Asher Tzesi Yesem Eretz Mitzrayim. The pasuk is the first pasuk of Maftir. Kapitel Chof Hey, pasuk Nun Hey. So what does Rashi comment, Ki li b'nei Yisrael avodim? Shtori koidem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I have a document that the Yidden are mine. See, what is the pasuk talking about? The pasuk is talking about an individual who has sold himself as a slave. So when he sells himself as a slave, this transaction brings about the shtar, the document of sale. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you should know, my document is prior to the document which you have just made by selling yourself as a slave. So Mamela, you should know you are my slave. You are mine. Truth is, if we look back a few psukim in this Sedra, in pasuk Mem Beis in the same capital, there's also a pasuk of Avadayhem, Ki Avadayhem, Yidden are my slaves, Asher Tzesi Yesem Eretz Mitzrayim. If we look into Rashi there also uses the same quotation, Ki Avadayhem, Shtarei Koid. We know how Rashi is so accurate that Rashi will not repeat an inyan even if it's in the same Chumash. Rabbi always tells us. Because the child who's learning Chumash remembers, here it's within the same Parsha, within the same 15 psukim, and Rashi repeats. the idea of Avodah Heim, that we are slaves to the Rabbeinu Shalom, because Shtori Koidem, Rashi says it in Pasuk Mem Beis, and says it again in Pasuk Nun Hey. 2 psukim before the end of the Seder. Torah tells us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Lo yisasu lachem alilim. We should not make any avodah zarah, ufesel matzeva, lo yisakimu lachem, ve'evem maskis, lo yisitnu ba'artzachem, lo yishtachvis Allah, ki ani Hashem Elokechem. So what does Rashi explain? Rashi says, being that we are talking here about an individual who has sold himself to a goy, so you shouldn't say, Hoyel v'rabi megala aroyes, being that his master is not careful the inyan of aroyes, and lives with those whom he shouldn't live with. Afani kama, you say, I will also do the same. Then he goes ahead and says, Hoyel v'rabi ovid avodah zarah, being that my master is serving avodah zarah. Afani kama, you say, I will do the same. Hoyel v'rabi mechal Shabbos, being that my master is mechal Shabbos because his master is a goy. Afani kama, you say. That is why the Torah has told us here, he should not do it. Lo yisasu lachem alilim, we should not do any avodah zarah. And then the pasuk beis, the pasuk which follows this, is a reminder on Shabbos, as Shabsosai tishmeiru, we should observe Shabbos u'mikdash tiro ani Hashem. So the Rebbe is asking a very obvious question here. Rashi is explaining what the pasuk is referring to. Why is there a repeat here of not to make any avodah zarah? Because we're talking about the individual case which the parasha here is talking about. We're talking about an individual who has sold himself to a goy, and being that he's in the goy's environment, and he sees the goy living with those women that we are prohibited to live with. He sees him serving avodah zarah, and he sees him not observing Shabbos. So the pasuk is cautioning us that this yid who was sold to the goy should not follow the footsteps of the goy. If we look into the pasuk, there is nothing mentioned in the psukim here about aroyos. What the Torah talks about is only avodah zarah and Shabbos. Rashi, when Rashi is giving us what this individual will calculate to himself, he says, Hoyel v'rabi megala aroyos afani kamoyu. Could be he may make this cheshm, especially Rashi is based on the Teres Chainim, but at least let Rashi say this last. Let Rashi explain this as the last one of the wrongdoings which he may think to copy his master. First, let Rashi say, the pasuk here comes with a special warning that he shouldn't think that being that his master is serving avodah zarah, he shall do the same. Hoyel v'rabi ovid avodah zarah afani k'moisei. That is why there's a pasuk here, L'sasu lachem alila. Then he may say that being that his master is mechal Shabbos, he will do the same. So that's why the pasuk tells us, no, regarding aroyos, there's nothing mentioned here in the pasuk. Rashi not only mentions it, but he mentions this first of everything. This question the Rebbe did not answer. Regarding the question of why Rashi repeats twice Shtori Koidem, Rebbe explains that basically in the world there are three general categories. There's a category of human beings. Then there's a category of Balei Chayim, animals, behemoths, so forth. Then there's a category of daimim, of things, of metaltal and things that have no life but can be moved, objects that can be moved from one area to another. When we are talking here of Kili b'nei Yisrael avodim, so right away the question arises, is it Yidden only that are avodim to the Eibishter? What's about Goyim? Goyim were also created by HaKadosh Baruch. So we are told no. It is only Yidden, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has chosen Yidden as his specialty, his dear ones, his beloved ones, and that is why it is Kili b'nei Yisrael avodim. Here we are talking, if we look into the Pasha, we're talking about two different types of Yidden. We're talking about a Yid who was forced to sell himself as a slave. However, whom is he selling himself to? He's selling himself to a Yid. So the Yid is warned, how he has to treat him. There are special halachas how a Yid has to treat his Jewish life. And very detailed halachas, how careful he has to be with his feelings and so forth, and not to overburden him, etc. So here we are told, you should remember, Ki avodehem, because you should know really every Yid is my slave. Whose slave is he? The slave of the Rabbeinu Shalom. And Shtori Koidem, I have a document on this individual, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, before you made it with him, before you made the transaction of acquiring him as a slave. Then we learn in the parsha about this Yid who was never so unfortunate that he had to sell himself to a goy. This Yid that went ahead and sold himself to a goy, he obviously is going. There are the circumstances that led to it and so forth. Is because he had went much further already from Yiddishkeit, and that is why he is already ready to go to serve a goy. So we may think that here we're talking already about an individual who has gone so far. Here the concept of Shtari Koidem, that my document, HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying, his document with this Jew is prior to the document that the Jew made with the non-Jew when he sold himself to him as a slave, does not apply here. Why? Because we're talking about a Yid who already went very far, went so far to the extent that he's Nimker La'akum, he sold himself to a guy. So the Pasuk tells us no. Even when we're talking about this individual who has gone so far to the extent that he sold himself to a guy, and we need special warnings in the Pasuk. Pasuk has to caution us, him specially, that he should not adopt the customs of the guy and the footsteps of the guy, and not go in that path of the guy. So even for this individual, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is referring to him as well. Ki li b'nei Yisrael avodim shtori koid. When the Rebbe was talking about Lag Ba'omer again later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe referred to the famous story of Rab Shimon ben Yochai, that Rab Shimon ben Yochai went out with his disciples, and when his Talmidim were complaining to him that they are in need of Gashmias, they are lacking Gashmias, they told him, he went out with them and they went to a valley. And when they came to the valley, Rashbi expressed himself, Bika, Bika, Hismali Dinarim. Valley, valley, become full of pieces of gold. And instantly, that's what happened to the valley. The valley became full of gold pieces. So the story continues that this was the Olam Haba of those individuals. So the way we learn the story in Pashtus is, in other words, the individuals had two opportunities. If they would take from these gold rubles, from these pieces of gold, it's like they would be taking from their reward in the world to come. This is how everybody learns Pshat in the Meister. The Rebbe today said a completely different Pshat. The Rebbe today said, on the contrary, this is bringing bracha to Yidden, a bracha of wealth, a bracha of ashiras to Yidden. And the Yidden are told that these are special dinrim. And Rashbi was so powerful that he was able to get these dinrim, these pieces of gold, without any tefillah. We don't find that he was mispalel for them, or he said a special Torah for them. All he did was he went out and he said, Bika, Bika, Ismali dinrim, valley become full of gold pieces. On the contrary, the Rebbe is learning, we are told the greatness and the great value of these gold pieces, that these are gold pieces, gold of Gan Eden. Not chas v'shalom that we shouldn't touch it. On the contrary, it came down for Yidden to touch and enjoy, and Yidden should bring only good to Yidden. But we are told it's special pieces of gold. Where did the Tana bring us this gold from? He acquired for us gold from Gan Eden.
So they took it?
Excuse me?
Did the Rebbe say where it is now?
They took it in the story?
Obviously, they should have taken it. Regarding its customary in the Farbrengen that the Rebbe learns a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, the Rebbe says that for today's Farbrengen, to choose a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, it's in the 4th Perek. Pirkei Avos is recited during the summer weeks. And from Pesach and Shavuos, everyone recites it. It is after Shavuos, there are Yesh Noyagin to recite it. Some that adhere to the custom, some do, some don't. But regardless, for today's Perek, to find a Mishnah that has a Shaykhis to Rab Shimon ben Yochai, to Lag Ba'omer, it's very, very obvious. We also said that if we were to look careful, we could find a Mishnah also that has a Shaykhis to the union of Pesach Sheni. But regarding the Mishnah that has a Shaykhis to Lag Ba'omer, it is the Mishnah Yud Gimel. The second part of Mishnah Yud Gimel in the 4th Perek is a quotation of Rab Shimon Oimer. We have a general rule. When it is mentioned in Shas, Rab Shimon Stam, without anything else to it, we refer to Rab Shimon ben Yochai. So here we have the quotation of Rab Shimon ben Yochai of Lag Ba'omer, whose day is Lag Ba'omer. What does Rab Shimon ben Yochai tell us? Shloisha Ksarim Him, there are 3 crowns. What are they? There's a Keser Torah, there's a crown of Torah. there's a crown of kahuna, and there's a crown of malchus, there's a crown of kingship. And he concludes, Keser Shem Tov, the crown of a good name, Eila al Gabeim, surpasses them all. The Rebbe asked the question, what kind of order is Reb Shimon counting the Shloisha Ksorim? If we were to look, as these Ksorim were created, Malchus is something which was in existence long before Torah. There were kings in the world. There's an Indian of a Keser Malchus. Even by Yidden, Moshe Rabbeinu had the status of a king, of a melech. The Rebbe says Moshe Rabbeinu was a melech even before the Yidden received the Torah. The moment he got involved in taking the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, and he took him out of Mitzrayim, that is when Moshe Rabbeinu had the title of being a king. So the Indian of a melech is something which was prior to Torah. The Indian of Kahuna is also something which came prior to Torah. Because we find it even by Avraham Avinu, we find the expression, V'hu koyin l'keil, there was a concept of Kahuna. Comes Reb Shimon and he wants to tell us that there are Shloisha Ksorim, there are 3 crowns. What are they? Keser Torah, Keser Kahuna, and Keser Malchus. What does Reb Shimon count first? The Keser of Torah, the crown of Torah. Why? Because this is what we spoke about before. This is Reb Shimon's Inyan. Reb Shimon's Inyan is Torah. Reb Shimon was Torasei Nasai, and therefore, though all these 3 crowns are extremely important and extremely outstanding and very valuable, which one of them does Reb Shimon count first? The crown of Torah. Then there's the famous question, why does he say 3 crowns? He's actually discussing 4 crowns. He's discussing the crown of Shem Tov also. This the Rebbe spoke about it many occasions, and he referred to it today again. Reb Shimon tells us that there are 3 crowns. However, Keser Shem Tov, the crown of a good name, Oila al Gabein, surpasses them all. However, Taich is Oila al Gabein, it goes above all when it comes together with them. In other words, the Keser Shem Tov in itself is not an Inyan in itself. When there is an Inyan of Torah, and there's an Inyan of Kahuna, one has all these 3 Inyanim, and together with it, he's fortunate of having a Keser Shem Tov, then we are told, Keser Shem Tov, Oila al Gabeim, that it surpasses all of them. However, when is the Chshivas of Keser Shem Tov really there? When Keser Shem Tov comes together with all the other 3 Ksarim, when it comes together with a crown of Torah, and a crown of Kahuna, and a crown of Malchus, that is when the Keser Shem Tov is also so valuable to the extent that it surpasses them all.
The simple meaning of Keser Shem Tov is that a person should have a good reputation.
Yes, good name, Ben Abrius. The Rebbe also mentioned, that being that we are before Lag B'Omer, and again, Lag B'Omer is a day of simcha, a day of joy, and the Rashbi wanted everybody should celebrate his day, and this day has a particular shaykhs to children. And it's customary that things take place on Lag B'Omer which involve children, programs which have children participating in it. Therefore, the Rebbe says that he would suggest that every child should undertake to contact at least one other child. A boy should contact at least another boy, and a girl should contact at least another girl, and influence them that they should take part in the programs in Inyanim which will have a shaykhs to the celebration of the day of Lag B'Omer, the day of Rashbi. There's an expression in Gemara, Kidai Reb Shimon ben Yochai, Kidai Rashbi, Lismay Cholov B'Shas Hatchak. This is an expression in Gemara. The literal explanation of this Inyan means that when there's a machlokes of Reb Shimon ben Yochai in another Tana, though the halacha will not be like Reb Shimon ben Yochai, in other words, it means and one is in the Shas Hatchak, which means an unusual situation, not an ordinary situation. Then he could even fear zich, and according to Reb Shimon ben Yochai, though the halacha is not like him. However, the Rebbe says there's a chsidische taich, Kedai Rashbi lismay cholov b'shas hatchak. The chak means engschaft, tightness, a time of tzara, Rachman al-Islam. And there's no bigger time of tzara than we are in now, that we are still in Golas, and Mashiach didn't take us out of Golas. And it's a time of kol akitzin. All the kates in which we had, all the indications which we had for the coming of Mashiach have already passed. It's only depending on tshuva, and this is something which is up to every single yid. So with the merit of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, whose day is Lag Ba'omer, it's Kedai Lismach Alav B'Shas HaChag. Rashbi said he's going to be the one that will help out Yidden when Yidden are in a matzav of the Chag, when Yidden are in a matzav of tightness. Spiritual tzaras Rahman al. Then Rashbi comes in, steps into the picture and helps us out. So let Rashbi come in, especially now as we're talking before the day of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, his day, which is Lag Ba'omer, and it's already the highest time to take us out of Golus. Rabbi also mentioned in tshuva, al pi halacha, we find that when one has thoughts of doing tshuva, it is considered as he's done tshuva. We find this in halacha b'negei kiddushin. Memela, the world's preparation for the coming of Mashiach and for the inyan of Gula is through tshuva. And again, with the koyach of Rashbi, as just mentioned, Kedai Rashbi Lismach Alav B'Shas HaChag, with the koyach of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, and celebrating his day, his special day, which is the day of Lag Ba'omer, this will lead to the inyan of Giyula. The Rebbe also mentioned that being that we are before Shavuos, an inyan which the Rebbe mentioned previously, and he's alerting us again to it, that Shavuos is an appropriate time, the first day of Shavuos, the Kriyas HaTorah, that all children, youngsters, infants be present in shul by the reading of the Aseres HaDibres and as well as the psukim prior to Aseres HaDibres, especially in light of the Medrash, that the Medrash tells us that when the Yidden received the Torah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu asked for a guarantor, and the Yidden responded, B'neinu ervim ba'adeinu, it is our children who are our guarantees. They are the guarantor that we will observe Torah and stick to Torah, and this was the only guarantee which HaKadosh Baruch Hu was willing to accept. So Mamela, when it comes Shavuos, the Rebbe asks that especially on the first day of Shavuos, when the reading of the Aseres HaDibros is read in shul, that all children, Yingalach and Meidalach, boys and girls, youngsters, infants, all kindalach, be there for the reading of the Torah on the first day of Shavuos.
There's a Zohar for the
special Zohar for it?
Yeah.
I think it's the
Farbrengen.
Reb Shimon, the Meira, together with his son Rabbi Eliezer. He expressed himself, Yechilna lifter Soila min adin, that he's powerful to free the entire world from any inyan of din, from any inyan of punishment. Reb Shimon ben Yochai could relieve the world from this. So again we see how Reb Shimon is dedicated to the entire generation, to the entire world, to every one of Klal Yisrael.
Does that mean that he did?
Yechilna. He said he could, I don't know. A good Tavach. The Rambam which the Rebbe learned today was a Rambam in Hilchis Gerushin. The halachas of divorce. And today's Shia for the learning of 3 Prokim and Rambam is the first 3 Prokim of Gerushin. In the second Perik of Hilchis Gerushin, there is a very famous Rambam which the Rebbe quoted it many, many times. And this is a Rambam regarding an individual who is supposed to divorce his wife. He's supposed to divorce her, and he refuses to divorce her. So the halacha is that Bezdin can force him to. Can. Bezdin is powerful to force him. It's a very famous Rambam. Because the Rambam says, "Lafikach zeh she'eina roitze legarish," the one that doesn't want to divorce, ma'acha she'u roitze liyas mi Yisrael, being that he wants to be a Yid, ve'roitze hu la'asa is kol ha-mitzvahs, and he wants to do all the mitzvahs, ola yisrachrek min ha'averes, and he wants to go away from averes, ve'yitzroi hu shetakvoi, and really it's only that his Yetzer Hara has gained control of him and does not let him listen to the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and in this particular case it is to divorce whoever he's supposed to divorce. V'kivan shehuka, being that he was hit, at shetoshash yitzroi, until his Yetzer Hara was weakened. V'amar roitzani, now he says that he's maskim to divorce her, kvar gorash l'retzoyna. It is considered that he's divorced her willingly. this is a halach in the Rambam, which at many, many occasions the Rebbe keeps on quoting this Rambam, what does the Rebbe prove from this Rambam? That really and truly, in the bottom of his heart, every Yid really wants to do the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is why when he is forced, and then he screams that this is what he wants to do, he's masking to divorce her, it is considered his full will. He was forced to do that. So we say it's not the pshat he was forced. Pshat is his will is really to do the wish of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is only that he was further away, he was divided from the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he didn't realize the truth, and now his eyes were enlightened, kind of. So the Rebbe asked, we find, if one is forced to do an Aveira, it's not considered that he did the Aveira. So why by a mitzvah, if he's forced to do the mitzvah, we do credit him? If we say that force is an outside, it's something exterior of the person, and when one is forced into a situation, it really does not express the wish of the individual. Behar, when the person is forced to do an Aveira, he's not punished to do the Aveira, for doing the Aveira. Why is it when he was forced to divorce her, which in this case is a mitzvah, he gets credit for it? And we say that he wanted to do the mitzvah. So the Rebbe basically got into a whole lengthy explanation how a person has prira. Really, a person has a choice. This is something that the Rambam discusses right away in the beginning, in the first Chelek Rambam, how everyone has his choice to do mitzvahs, to do the opposite. And the Rebbe based his Indian here. The Rambam does not say v'yitzri husha tokvoi. I'm sorry, the Rambam says yitzri husha tokvoi and not yitzri husha onsoi. The Rebbe says when he always repeats this Rambam, and as mentioned, the Rebbe repeats it many, many occasions, he always expresses yitzroi onsoi. That is his yetzer hara that has forced him from holding him back from doing the Aveira, from fulfilling the wish of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rebbe says it is really not onsoi, it is yitzroi tokvoi. There's a difference between onsoi and tokvoi. Onsoi means the yetzer hara forces him. Tokvoi means the yetzer hara kind of attacked him, but it's not forcing him. And you see, this is like a difference between force and tokvoi. Tokvei is only yitzri husha tokvei. So Mamela, this person is really in a position of wanting to do the mitzvahs. And he wants to do the mitzvahs, but it's only yitzri husha tokvei. V'kiven shehuka chetashish yitzri. And now he says, Reitzani, it's considered that he wants to do this mitzvah already. However, when he's forced to do an Aveira, there it's a complete different situation. There he's forced. Furthermore, Rabbi tied it into the whole meaning of prira. Prira is taken away from him. Really, a person has choice to do what he wants. When he's forced to do an Aveira, the pshat is we're taking away the power of choice from him. So there we can definitely not punish him for an Aveira which he has done by force. He definitely did not do it according to his will.